When Officer Travis Brenner pulled over a black Mercedes on a quiet street in Columbia, South Carolina, he thought it was routine. Maybe a stolen car, maybe just a hunch. What he didn't expect was the woman behind the wheel to be a sitting judge, still in her robe, heading home from court. What followed wasn't just a traffic stop. It was a quiet standoff that unraveled everything he thought he knew about suspicion, authority, and who gets to be seen as legitimate. By the time the cameras rolled and the crowd gathered, his badge wasn't a shield, it was a spotlight. And the robe she wore, it wasn't just cloth. It was history. It was power, and it was about to challenge everything. But first, leave a comment below to let us know where you are watching from, and if you like fascinating stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have another incredible story, and there are many surprises waiting for you in the next parts. Saluda Avenue sat still under the fading sun, framed by manicured lawns and porches draped in old money. Travis, nursing the last inch of lukewarm coffee in his dinted thermos, watched the Mercedes roll a little too slow through a stop sign. No plate on the back, one driver inside. The kind of detail that catches an officer's eye near the end of shift, more about feel than fact. He hit the lights, called it in, and what greeted him wasn't tension, not right away. The window came down smooth, and the voice inside didn't tremble. "Evening, officer?" the woman said, her tone calm enough to land a plane. Silver hair, maybe mid-60s, black robe still draped from the bench. "I'm Judge Renee Mallory. This is my vehicle. I'm on my way home from court." License and registration came without hesitation. Everything matched. Her demeanor didn't flinch, not even when Travis said the car matched a stolen vehicle report. She raised an eyebrow, asked him to confirm with dispatch. He did. Dispatch cleared her. No issues. Still, he didn't hand the papers back. Something about the calm unnerved him. Something about her posture made him want to poke a hole in it. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle," he said, shifting into a tone more force than request. She blinked once, then asked, "Is that a lawful order?" His hand dropped toward his belt. "Yes." She didn't move. Her voice sharpened but didn't rise. "Are you detaining me?" The words landed heavy. A teenager across the street started filming. A phone blinked red. She said her name louder, not for him, but for the witnesses now growing on the sidewalk. "Judge Renee Mallory, 5th Judicial Circuit. This vehicle is mine, you've confirmed that. I am now being unlawfully detained." He didn't answer. His badge felt suddenly hot against his chest. Someone in the crowd called out, "That's the judge who gave my brother probation last year." The neighborhood had shifted. Eyes turned toward him, not with curiosity, but scrutiny. She stayed silent, looking forward, calm like granite. Renee rolled up her window 2 inches, not slamming it, just enough she turned her head forward. He walked back to his cruiser, heart pounding. But the story wasn't ending there. Travis stared through the windshield, tapping the steering wheel, dispatch's confirmation still ringing in his ears. Everything checked out, but his pride didn't. He stepped out again. The crowd had grown. More phones, more murmurs. She didn't budge. When he asked more questions, she answered like a woman used to speaking from behind a bench, not from behind glass. "Since February of last year. Paid in full. Certified pre-owned. Midlands." Mercedes. When he asked how she paid for it, her expression didn't shift. "Are you asking that because I'm a black woman in a nice car?" And just like that, the robe wasn't just cloth anymore. It was a mirror. One that didn't bend. One that made the badge feel less like armor and more like a threat. And Travis Brenner was starting to realize he hadn't pulled over a suspect. He'd pulled over the law itself. When law meets lens, truth can't hide. What began as a quiet pullover had started to pulse like a live wire in the middle of Saluda Avenue. Travis stood beside his cruiser, watching the edges of the crowd swell, not fast but steady, like rising water under a floor you didn't know was cracked. Two more teenagers stepped onto the sidewalk, phones already recording. A woman in scrubs slowed her jog to a stop, watching from the opposite side of the street, her earbuds still in but her focus locked on the scene. A man with a stroller paused, not out of curiosity, but because something in the stillness told him this wasn't routine anymore. The red light on the first phone across the street blinked without pause. No words needed. The lens had already picked a side, and it wasn't his. Renee Mallory hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't threatened, hadn't cowered, she hadn't moved. But her stillness echoed like a drumbeat through the block. The same woman who ruled over courtrooms now sat behind her own wheel with the calm of someone who's been wrongly accused more times than she can count. Her silence wasn't surrender. It was structure. A frame she'd built over decades of being told she didn't belong, even when the gavel said otherwise. She didn't need to explain. Her posture did the speaking. Travis could feel the difference, not in his head, but in his chest, in the way his shirt clung tighter with every second he hesitated. He'd been taught how to escalate, how to manage control, but no one ever taught him how to stand down when control was the problem. A voice behind him, barely louder than the breeze, muttered, "He's still holding her." Another joined in, "Cameras on, y'all, just in case." The street didn't erupt. It simmered. Low voices, heavy eyes, the kind of pressure that doesn't shout. It watches. And in the quiet, Travis felt the weight of every silent stare. Every camera lens aimed not just at his body, but at his judgment. He turned back toward the car. The Mercedes sat still. No movement inside. Just the silhouette of a woman who knew that sometimes the most powerful protest is stillness. Her silence was a sermon, and his badge was starting to burn. He tapped on the window again. Once, twice. Not forceful, but not gentle either. Renee lowered the glass another 2 inches, just enough to speak. "You've confirmed who I am. You've confirmed this vehicle is mine. So what exactly are we still doing here?" Her voice hadn't lost its composure, but it carried something new now. Pressure. Not panic. Precision. The kind that lands like a courtroom sentence and doesn't leave room for appeal. Travis swallowed. The crowd wasn't just watching now. It was absorbing, processing, comparing. A judge in a robe and a cop with a hand that kept drifting too close to his belt. A woman who made rulings for a living and a man who seemed unsure of his next move. He opened his mouth, closed it. "I'm just asking questions," he said, but it came out thin, already fraying. A kid in a hoodie from across the street tilted his phone and called out, "Yo, why's she still not allowed to leave?" Another added, "She gave my cousin a fair shot last year, man. She ain't new to this." Travis ignored them, but each word landed like a pebble thrown into water. Not violent, just widening. Marcy Keller's patrol unit rolled up slow behind him. She stepped out, cool-headed, late 30s, sharp and built for moments that teetered. One look and she read the street like a defense attorney reads a jury. She saw the crowd, saw the phones, saw the robe. Her mouth tightened. "Travis," she said under her breath, "what's going on?" He didn't answer right away. "Possible stolen vehicle," he said, his voice like dry paper. Marcy blinked. "That's Judge Mallory." "I know. You need to clear this." "I'm trying." "No," she said, her tone clipped but quiet. "You're not." Marcy wasn't loud. She didn't have to be. She stood still for a second, just long enough for the weight of the moment to bend toward her. Her presence didn't dissolve the tension, it redirected it. Travis felt the focus shift, not from him but around him, like the whole neighborhood had taken a collective breath and was waiting to see if he'd let it go or choke on it. Renee's voice cut back through. "Officer Brenner, I would like to leave. Unless I'm being detained, I'm requesting to proceed." He didn't answer. He looked at the ground, then at Marcy, then back at the car. His silence answered for him. The red light on the live stream phone across the street blinked again. A new voice joined the mix, this one older, deeper, more deliberate. "She's been on the bench longer than he's been out of school. What's he proving?" And that's when the shift became clear. This wasn't a stop anymore. It was a stage, and everyone had already chosen where to stand. Travis stepped back, arms crossed, breathing shallow. He thought he was enforcing a possibility. What he was actually doing was confirming a reality. His silence screamed now. Every second he stood still was an admission that he didn't know what to do without power, that he didn't trust the confirmation from dispatch, the badge in her glove box, or the authority stitched into her robe. And the crowd wasn't moving. They didn't yell. They didn't riot. They just waited, watching a man with a badge try to figure out how to walk away from his own assumptions without looking like he lost. But by now, it was too late. He hadn't just lost control of the stop, he'd lost control of the story. And Judge Renee Mallory hadn't said a single word she couldn't defend, because she didn't need to. The truth had already started telling itself. One touch. That's all it took for the air to snap. The moment Officer Travis Brenner's fingers closed around Judge Renee Mallory's wrist, the temperature on Saluda Avenue shifted. Not like weather, like warning. Like an alarm bell that didn't ring in sound, but in breathless silence. The crowd didn't scream, not yet. They inhaled first, dozens of phones angled upward. One woman gasped, not out of shock but disbelief. Like watching someone walk directly into their own undoing. The live stream caught it in perfect timing. The hesitation, the reach, the contact. He didn't yank her. He didn't shove. But he touched her. And that was enough. That was too much. Renee didn't flinch. Her body remained still, but her voice returned sharp, clean, and surgical. "Officer Brenner," she said, "if you place your hands on me without cause, you will be making a career-ending decision." The words didn't rise. They dropped like gavel strikes. Final, heavy, inevitable. Travis blinked, the weight of her words hitting a place in him that hadn't been trained for. His grip didn't tighten, but it didn't release either, and in that in-between moment, the story didn't pause. It unraveled. A teenage boy across the street shouted, "Yo, you touching her now? She's a judge. Get your hands off her, man." His voice cracked from adrenaline, not puberty. Another woman added, "Oh, he gone too far now. He really did it." Marcy Keller didn't wait. She moved with intention, stepping between them, her shoulder squared to Travis. "Back off," she said, low but firm, the kind of voice that only comes from watching too many things go sideways too fast. Her hand didn't reach for her weapon. It reached for his forearm, peeling it away with the same calm precision Renee had just used in her words. "Let go, right now." Travis let go, not out of reason, not even out of respect, out of pressure. His breathing was uneven, lips parted like he wanted to say something, anything to explain it away. But he didn't. There was no script for this, no training manual for how to retreat without retreating. Renee took a single step back, hands at her sides, robe still hanging off her shoulders like a banner of patience. Her voice returned, this time louder. "I will be filing a formal complaint. I will be requesting the full release of all bodycam and dashcam footage." Then she turned to the crowd. "And I strongly recommend that anyone filming tonight preserve their recordings." A ripple of nods passed through the bystanders. Not applause, not protest, agreement, witness. Something about her calm carried more authority than any badge in sight. She didn't shout. She didn't threaten. She simply declared. And in that declaration, the city was already deciding whose side to believe. Travis tried to regroup. He stepped back, fists balled, face flushed. He wasn't thinking clearly anymore. He was reacting to being watched, to being corrected, to the slow realization that whatever authority he thought he held was slipping. "You need to return to your vehicle," he said to Renee, his voice stretched thin like duct tape over a crack in concrete. "Ma'am, I'm asking you to comply." But the words were empty now. Marcy's eyes cut sideways. "She complied with everything. Until it got personal," she said quietly, just loud enough for him to hear. "And you made it personal." Renee still hadn't moved. She said nothing for a beat, then replied with absolute clarity. "You're making up charges now. That's misconduct." Travis snapped. "Get back in the car!" His voice finally rose, but it didn't make him stronger. It made him smaller. From across the street, the woman holding the live stream phone said loud enough for everyone to hear, "This man's about to arrest a judge because she made him look stupid." No one laughed. Not because it wasn't funny, but because it was true. The kind of truth that doesn't need punchlines. Just witnesses. Then Renee stepped forward. Not aggressively, not to escalate, just enough to close the space, to make her next words hit clean. "If you touch me again without cause, you're not enforcing the law, you're dismantling your own department." Travis swallowed hard. He stepped toward her, but his hands didn't move. And then came the voice that made his spine lock in place. "Don't," Marcy again. One word. That's all it took. The authority in it was absolute. It sliced through the tension like a judge silencing a courtroom. Renee's presence in that moment wasn't dramatic. It was dignified, and that's what made it hit harder. She didn't plead. She didn't cower. She simply stood as proof. Proof that sometimes strength isn't in who yells louder, but who holds the line without bending. The crowd saw it, they felt it, and they recorded it. She had become more than a person in a robe. She had become the center of a lesson playing out in real time. And Travis? He wasn't the teacher, he was the test. As she stepped back into her car, door clicking shut with surgical finality, the crowd didn't cheer. They didn't clap. They watched, silent, steady, present. Phone still up, because they knew it wasn't over. Not yet. Not by a long shot. Travis stood there, jaw tight, staring at a badge that used to feel like protection and now felt more like evidence. And behind that calm windshield, Judge Renee Mallory adjusted her mirror, not to look at him, but to look past him, because she already knew the next part of this story wasn't going to be about him controlling the situation. It was going to be about whether the system could handle what the situation had just revealed. When silence hits the news, it speaks louder than speeches. By the time the morning sun crept across Columbia's brick sidewalks, the video had already crossed 300,000 views. A 4-minute clip, no gunshots, no screaming, just one calm voice, one shaking badge, and one crowd that decided to bear witness, had ignited something bigger than either of them. Headlines stacked like verdicts. Judge detained after routine traffic stop. Body cam silence raises questions. Was her robe the real threat? It was no longer about what Travis Brenner said or didn't say. It was about what he'd done without ever realizing the cost. Because while Renee Mallory drove home that night with her name and dignity intact, he drove home with a department bracing for damage control. At the Columbia Police Department, the air was thick and brittle. The usual small talk over burnt coffee had vanished, replaced with side glances and silent judgment. Travis sat stiff in the corner of the briefing room while Chief Epps laid out the day's reality with the precision of a prosecutor. "This is what we're up against," he said, sliding a printout across the table. The headline glared back like a slap. No one said Travis's name, but every eye said it for him, even Marcy's. "You file your incident report?" Epps asked. "Yes, sir." "I read it. Doesn't match what's on the footage." No one blinked. "You're on administrative leave. Effective immediately, with pay. But don't mistake that for support." The message was clear. Travis hadn't just broken protocol, he'd broken the department's ability to pretend it couldn't happen here. Across town, Renee sat in her kitchen, coffee gone cold beside her. She didn't answer her phone. Not the reporters, not the clerks, not the colleagues. Instead, she watched the video herself, watched her own face on someone else's screen, watched the stillness she wore like armor, watched the moment his hand brushed her wrist, and every childhood warning she thought she'd outlived came flooding back like water under a sealed door. She hadn't cried that night. Not when she got home, not even when her clerk texted, "They're calling you a symbol." She didn't want to be a symbol. She wanted to be a person who did her job and drove home. But her father had warned her. He used to wear the badge too. A patrolman in Columbia in the 1970s, Thomas Parker never sugarcoated the truth for his daughter. "The robe won't always protect you," he'd told her when she got her first judicial appointment. Some folks will look right through it, past your degree, past your record. They'll only see what they've already decided is real. At 17, she hadn't understood. At 30, she thought she could outwork it. Now, watching herself be detained in full judicial robe for driving her own car, she understood it wasn't about how many laws you knew. It was about how many assumptions you triggered before you even spoke. That afternoon, Travis sat on his back porch with the door shut, blinds drawn, and a pad of paper in his lap. His daughter's laughter floated from the living room, distant and innocent. The notepad was labeled Bias Reflection Assignment, a required step in the disciplinary process, but it felt more like a mirror he didn't want to face. He'd started writing 3 times, torn the page out each time, but this time he wrote 1 sentence and didn't stop. I didn't see her, not as a person, not as a judge, not even as someone with a name. He stared at it, let the words sink in. That wasn't an apology, that was a confession, and maybe the first honest one he'd made since the stop. He thought he was enforcing safety. He ended up revealing fragility his own. The badge had made him believe he was the final word, but it hadn't taught him how to listen, how to see without suspicion. Renee had stayed calm because she'd lived through worse. He had stayed firm because he didn't know how to admit he was wrong without it sounding like surrender. Now the city was watching both of them, but only one of them had something to prove, and it wasn't the judge in the robe. Later that evening, a protest bloomed outside the precinct. Not massive, maybe 100 people, but the signs carried more than slogans. Power doesn't equal permission. Who judges the police? Someone held up still frames from the body cam. Her robe, his grip, her calm, his confusion. They weren't just images, they were evidence. Inside the building, Travis packed his desk into a cardboard box, his hands slower than necessary. He looked at the photo of his wife and daughter at Myrtle Beach, toes buried in sand, smiles wide and unaware. How do you explain to a child that you became part of the very problem you once promised to fight? As night fell, Renee sat alone in her living room. Not tired, just full. Full of memory, full of echo, full of the quiet kind of rage that doesn't shout. It waits. She wasn't naive enough to think the attention would last. She knew the news cycle would move on. But she also knew the faces in that crowd, the ones holding phones, holding space, holding truth. Those people wouldn't forget. And neither would she, because she hadn't just survived that night. She'd documented it. She'd endured it publicly, and somehow she'd done it without flinching. This wasn't the end. Not for the city, not for Travis, and not for Judge Mallory. This was only the moment when silence spoke too loud to ignore, the moment where one man's reflex became a city's reckoning. And in that reckoning, power wasn't the loudest voice. Dignity was. Composure was. And somewhere between regret and reflection, truth began to settle in places where it had been missing for too long. You can silence a mic, you can't silence consequence. The hearing was held in a modest municipal building on Hardin Street, not a grand courthouse with marble floors and press banners, just a plain room with folding chairs and a clock that ticked too loudly. But inside that room, every breath carried weight. There were no theatrics, no pounding gavels, just 5 panelists behind a long table, a screen to the side, and 2 figures on opposite ends of the same moment in time. One wore a navy blazer, khakis and shoulders drawn tight. The other sat in silence, back straight, palms folded, the same posture she held when reading sentencing statements. Only today, Judge Renee Mallory wasn't there to rule. She was there to testify. Travis Brenner entered through the side, not in uniform. He had no badge on display, no weapon at his hip, just a hollow sort of quiet that settled into his frame like dust. No one clapped, no one whispered, just silence. The kind that doesn't ask for explanations, it waits for them. At the front, Chairwoman Vera Lindell, a retired judge from Charleston with eyes like polished steel, opened the session. We're here to determine whether Officer Brenner's conduct on Saluda Avenue reflected the values and policies of this department. We are not here to argue intention, we are here to review action. Then the footage played. No commentary, no spin, just the body cam feed, the stop, the silence, the questions, the moment. Minute 11:17, the hand near the holster, the wrist grab, the audio drop. 40 seconds of visual footage with no sound, like watching someone edit out the truth in real time. When the screen paused, Vera adjusted her glasses and looked at Travis. "Officer Brenner," she said, "can you explain why your body cam audio was disabled at that moment?" He shifted. "I don't know, it might have been a malfunction." "Are you aware," she continued, "that logs show your hand brush the mute toggle at the precise timestamp?" He didn't speak right away. "Yes," he said finally. The words sat in the air like smoke. Renée didn't react. She hadn't flinched during the footage. She didn't glance at Travis. She waited until invited, then stood with the same composure she carried in her courtroom. No theatrics, no tremble. Just a voice steady and exact. "I am not here for an apology," she began. "I'm here for acknowledgement. What happened on that street wasn't just about me. It was about what my robe couldn't shield and what his badge couldn't justify." She paused, not for effect, but for air, for weight. "I followed the law. He followed a suspicion. And when those paths collided, it didn't matter who I was. It mattered who he believed I wasn't." She didn't argue to win. She explained to teach. Her voice moved with the rhythm of someone who'd spent decades choosing each word carefully, not because she feared mistakes, but because clarity mattered more than sound. "Every day," he said, "I sit in courtrooms and ask, is this person a threat, a risk, a danger to the system? And every day I do that knowing the system itself is tilted. And yet, I do the job. I follow the law." That night, I wasn't treated like someone who upholds it. I was treated like someone who didn't belong in the car I paid for, in the neighborhood I drove through, in the body I live in. Travis stared at the table, jaw tight. Her words weren't loud, but they filled the room. And the truth is that was harder to sit through than if she'd yelled. There was no anger in her tone, only resolve, the kind of resolve that didn't need volume to be felt. When she finished, she sat down and didn't speak again. She didn't need to. The echo of her testimony wasn't in the words, it was in the restraint, the grace of someone wronged who never stopped carrying herself like she was right where she was supposed to be. The panel deliberated for 30 minutes. When they returned, Vera Lindell didn't drag it out. The committee finds that Officer Brenner engaged in conduct unbecoming of his position. His actions were excessive, unsupported by policy, and suggest a pattern of judgment inconsistent with departmental expectations. The words didn't crack the room. They settled into it. "We recommend a 60-day unpaid suspension and mandatory bias retraining. Further violations will result in immediate termination." Gasps were stifled. Someone murmured, "Too light." Another, "At least it's something." But Renée Mallory didn't blink, didn't nod, didn't gloat. She gathered her coat, thanked the panel, and walked out without a glance back. A reporter met her at the exit with a mic angled like an accusation. "Judge Mallory, do you feel justice was served today?" She didn't pause. "I don't believe in justice as a moment," she said. "It's a practice, and tonight was just one part of it." Then she disappeared into the dusk, same as she had that night under the dogwood tree. Not rushed, not rattled, just steady. And outside, where the air was cooler and the cameras blinked less urgently, the people watching didn't cheer. They didn't protest. They just stood a little straighter. Because they'd seen what accountability looked like when it didn't come in shouts, but in sentences that landed like truth. Inside, Travis stayed in his chair a little longer. He didn't argue. He didn't ask for a break. He just sat. Because when consequence finally shows up, it doesn't come with noise. It comes with clarity. And in that small hearing room, surrounded by the wreckage of his choices, Travis Brenner wasn't a villain. He was something quieter. A man who'd walked too far with the wrong assumptions and finally learned what they cost. Not his job. Not yet. But the illusion that a badge makes you right by default, that was gone. And what replaced it wasn't shame. It was the beginning of something harder, reflection. The kind you can't turn off. The kind that doesn't fit in a report. The kind that stays. The story didn't end in court. It began in conversation. In classrooms where teenagers debated authority for the first time. In barbershops where fathers explained why silence can be dangerous. In kitchens where mothers reminded their sons what dignity looks like when it's threatened. Judge Renee Mallory's name had once been known mostly in court circles, but now it floated through everyday speech like a question everyone had to answer. Not about guilt or innocence, but about assumption. About how fast you see someone and how slow you are to correct your own reflex. She returned to the bench 1 week after the hearing. No press conference, no fanfare, just a quiet walk through the courthouse doors and into her chambers before sunrise. Her robe was the same one she'd worn that night. No one commented on it, but the clerks noticed. So did the deputies. And when the first case was called that morning, the courtroom didn't just listen. They leaned in. Not because she'd changed, but because something about her presence had shifted. She didn't carry a grudge, she carried a reminder. That justice isn't a speech. It's a rhythm. And she was back to set the tone. The case was simple on paper: a 17-year-old boy on probation for shoplifting, a violation reported from a school incident. First-time offense, no prior history, but the details were fuzzy. He stood stiff in the defendant's seat, shirt tucked in too tight, eyes flicking between his shoes and the wall clock. His mother sat behind him, wringing her hands like someone praying without saying a word. When Judge Mallory spoke, her voice didn't rise, but it filled the room. "Tell me something," she said. "Do you know why you're standing here today?" The boy nodded, voice cracking. "Because I made a mistake." She leaned forward slightly, gaze steady. "That's part of the answer. But you're also standing here because you were caught. The question is whether you understand what that moment teaches you." He looked up, uncertain. She didn't rush. "I'm continuing your probation without extension," she said. "No jail. But next time there won't be another conversation. Do you understand?" He nodded fast, words sticking in his throat. "Yes, ma'am." The gavel landed like punctuation, sharp and clean, and in that moment the lesson wasn't just his, it was everyone's. Because mercy, when given with purpose, doesn't just correct, it rebuilds. And for Judge Mallory, that courtroom wasn't a place to remind people who held power, it was a place to remind them what power was supposed to do. Across town, Travis Brenner sat at his kitchen table with a yellow pad in front of him. The words "bias reflection assignment" were printed at the top. Below that, only one sentence so far: "I didn't see her as a person." That was the failure. He'd written it the night after the hearing and hadn't added to it for days. But now he picked up the pen again, not because he was told to, but because silence didn't feel like an option anymore. "I saw a black woman in a car that didn't match the story I told myself about who belonged in it. And instead of questioning that story, I questioned her." He paused, listened to the low hum of the refrigerator, the clock ticking louder than usual, his daughter humming in the other room. "I thought I was being careful. What I was really being was afraid. Of being wrong. Of looking weak. Of letting something go that I couldn't explain to someone else later. But that's not law enforcement. That's insecurity with a badge on." He exhaled hard and kept writing. She didn't yell. She didn't accuse. She let me show who I really was. And I did. The words sat heavy on the page. But they were real, and they were his. In the weeks that followed, the protest signs faded, but the conversations deepened. City Council opened a dialogue on traffic stop protocol. The police department updated its body cam policy. Schools began teaching modules on civic power and accountability, and somewhere between outrage and reform, the community started asking better questions, not about one officer or one judge, but about what kind of city it wanted to become. The lessons didn't land like fire. They landed like seeds, quiet, slow, growing under the surface of what had been a very public reckoning. Renée Mallory kept her routine. Courtroom by day, solitude by night. But every so often, someone would stop her at the grocery store, hand her a note, or whisper thank you in passing. She didn't seek praise, but she accepted it with a nod, knowing the real work wasn't in the headlines. It was in the habits. She thought often about her father, about the night she was 17, stopped on the street with a bag of groceries and a textbook, told to sit on the curb while officers asked the same question 3 different ways. Her father had told her, don't cry in front of them, don't give them your power. And now, all these years later, she hadn't cried in front of Travis either. She had done something else. She had stood still and made the truth show up for itself. And that was the point. She didn't just judge cases. She judged moments, and the moment judged back. Not with vengeance, with vision, because true justice doesn't yell its name, it earns its echo. And as she pulled out of the courthouse parking lot that afternoon, same car, same spot, same mirror, she caught a glimpse of 3 high school students walking by with clipboards. One of them looked up and shouted, "Judge Mallory, we saw your video in class." She smiled softly. "Good or bad?" "Both," he yelled back. "But it made us talk." She laughed, nodding. Then it did its job. Back in his house, Travis sat with the pad still open, his handwriting now a little darker, a little more certain. What we choose to see or refuse to cost people more than their dignity. It can cost them peace, safety, the future they worked for. If I've learned anything, it's this. Power means nothing without responsibility, and respect means everything when it's hardest to give. He closed the notebook, leaned back in the chair and looked toward the window. No sirens, no blue lights, just stillness. The kind that asks you to stay honest even when no one's looking, especially then, because the real reckoning never happens when the cameras are on. It happens when you're finally willing to see. Leave a comment below to let us know where you are watching from, and if you like fascinating stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have another incredible story, and there are many surprises waiting for you in the next parts.